Namaskar. This is Professor Aman Agarwal from Indian Institute of Finance. And I'm very happy to welcome you all in this series, the webinar series on the essence of life and growth. I'm happy to say we've had astounding speakers give out various mantras of what we can deal with and how can we deal with in terms of positivity. The whole objective of introducing this series was to induce positivity and the positive aspects of life and growth, and bring perspectives of people who have over 3 to 4 decades of work experience, of life experience, to share from their own personal life experiences of how they see the essence of life and growth. We have tried to bring in people from across streams and different parts of the world before you to enhance upon the issue of essence of life and growth. We've had very nice speakers. I think we've learned a lot from each one of them. We've had, just to name a few today, I thought I should do, is Professor Arun Kumar from JNU. Then we had Vaibhav Agarwal, who is a BJP national leader. Then we had Dr. Kai Sundarlund, who had been Chief of Mission here in India for Finland and various other countries, and diplomat, senior diplomat. He was also advisor to the Prime Minister of Finland. Then we had the Honorable former Secretary Government of India, Mr. Mohammad Ali Khanji. Then we had Dr. G.P. Rao, who has been an HR professional, a specialist who has had large corporations like Reliance, ITC, SAIL, and various others. And he has been a guru, a person who has built up human capital across the globe. Most of these videos, except for the first 3, are available on our YouTube channel. We had also Jayashree Pandya. She is the CEO of Rix Group from the US, based in New York. Her company is based in Texas. We also had Dilip Chinoy. Dilip I've known all of them for almost over 20 years now. Dilip is the Secretary General of FICCI. We had Manoj Agarwal, who is the Managing Editor of Banking Frontiers, a leading magazine in banking spheres. We had Ranjit Kapoor, who is running an entrepreneur for the last 50 years, running an MSME in Noida in India. Then we had the Honorable Professor Dr. Deepak Voraji, who is an ambassador. Everyone knows him as a TV figure, who is currently also advisor to a large number of prime ministers in Africa, including the Prime Minister in India, and also the Leh Ladakh Hill Development Council. He's also an honorary professor at the Indian Institute of Finance. We also had Mr. Jay Shankar. Mr. P.R. Jayashankar is currently the Executive Director of National Housing Bank, and the Board of Banks has nominated him to be a Managing Director of one of the large public sector undertakings of India. We also had a professor from University of Delhi, Hindu College, who had enlightened us about the way of life for young people is there. And yesterday we had another astounding personality. I've known her for over a decade now. She was Liz Fuller, who has been a Hollywood actor, and apart from that, model and Miss Britain, Great Britain. Today we have another astounding fellow, a person, a scholar, a researcher, even a TV presenter. He runs a specific jury program, a law program on the television on Delhi Doordarshan network, although I could never be part of that program. I don't come from the law fraternity per se, but I would like to always sneak in here and there, and I hope one day he considers me also to be part of that program. But I have always been charmed by him, and the sophistication, the way he deals. I have heard a couple of his dealings in the Delhi High Court, the way he responds, the way he takes care, and I have seen that human part of him. And so I thought, I must bring him in because he has so much knowledge which he shares only amongst his colleagues and friends or through Facebook and some of the other social media. But I thought a wider audience is required for his knowledge and know how to reach. He is Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Rajiv Saxena, and Mr. Rajiv Saxena is currently an advocate of Delhi High Court officially, but he is a senior advocate in my eyes because he's been in service, if I understand correctly, over 35 years in the advocacy. He has never looked for positions, but a person who has brought smiles at the faces of his clients, keeping justice in due form. He's also been rewarded by being brought on the main committee, which is the EC, Executive Committee of the University of Delhi, which takes the decisions, major decisions, academic, financial, all kinds of decisions, which are taken under by the University of Delhi. As a member, he served them for a long time, and he's also currently the Honorary Secretary of the Global Jurist, which is an NGO which he is part of, an active member of. I also know he is a teacher in his heart, and I have seen him organize large number of debates and seminars in the judiciary, in the high courts, some of which I have attended myself, although again, I'm not a lawyer, but I have had the privilege of having access to him, and through him having access to attend some of these meetings where senior judicial members, judges, former attorney generals have addressed his forums and enlightened us of what is happening in the world around in terms of law. Today, Rajiv ji, we are not talking about law, but I know that law is part and parcel of your life. And so we are going to begin with the essence of life. And as I had requested and discussed with you, we will do that. We've had you on a couple of shows, so you know what I'm doing. So I will be moving on in a minute as a spotlight on you so that then we can begin the question and answer. Please give me a second.
Sure. Namaskar. It's been a wonderful session for last almost 2 weeks, Amanji, since when I have been following your webinar, and a wonderful exposure also to various facets of life through persons you have invited to talk, and a very enriching experience. Yesterday I have heard Liz Fuller, a brain in beauty, I must say, put together, an excellent spokesperson, speaker, and a motivator. I found her to be a good motivator as well, besides being a good entrepreneur herself. We have had very good exposure with each other for last so many years, and with your father, Professor J.D. Agarwal, who had been a guiding light in my life. As a student, I have greatest of respect and regard for him, and I could never forget his personality and his teachings, and he's always there whenever I look for seeking his blessings, and I've been fortunate enough to get it. And perhaps it's people like Professor J.D. Agarwal himself, yourself, and your mother, Professor Manju Agarwal, talking to them, understanding the life, the way it has come to me, you need, you think of searching the essence of your life and growth. Though it's a very subjective matter for everyone, to me, the essence of life and growth started when I actually came into practice. My father was a businessman, and he had made his life all by himself, because we all come from very middle class family of old Delhi. But we had the advantage of coming from a joint family, a virtual joint family background, where at a whisker you could have almost 70 persons at any point of time. So we have grown up in a joint family, which concept is now fast losing its essence. Maybe because of the paucity of space, maybe because of the distances that have come by, maybe because of the opportunities that people have started seeking, and the family is growing bigger and larger. The essence of growth, the essence of life and growth, to me came in the very first initial phase of my joining law practice. To put it honestly, my father was a businessman, so he wanted me to join his business. But I somehow, right from the very beginning, was very overawed by the personality of one of my uncle who was in practice as a lawyer. A very straightforward, upright, and a respectable lawyer and a person in society. And I chose legal law as my profession of my own choice. There was no compulsion, there was no pressure, and I chose it as a matter of choice. I did my post-graduation in commerce under Professor J.D. Agarwal, who was my teacher, and after that I did law. So it was a destined profession for me. I was destined to be here, and I am happy to be here. That's one major aspect. Because at times people say that since you have nothing to do, so you have taken law as a profession, which I somehow do not want to say. I have chosen this as a profession and I enjoy it. That's one important aspect. So when I was joining my practice, and my father wasn't too very happy because he wanted me to take up his business. My younger brother had already shown his intention to take up the business. And being part of a joint family, you have to take certain times a hard decision when you want to come out of your that shell. And it was that hard decision which I had taken. But at the back of it all was there the blessings of my father, my mother, and my entire family, which stood by me at all times. It just so happened that initially when I started practicing law, I joined my uncle's chamber and at the district court. It were difficult times, but then since I have opted it for myself, I enjoyed it. I started enjoying it. But suddenly there was a strike, a very long strike, which perhaps, and with my background in the family and some good work which I had been doing right from my passing out from my school. Independently, I have done a bit of theater, I have done a bit of independent licensing, I have done a bit of sales, just to supplement my pocket money. And with all that on the background, I bought a car in the initial stages of my practice, a second-hand car. But it just so happened that the moment I bought a car, which my father told me that I have to manage myself, suddenly there was a strike in the courts. And this strike went on for almost 3 months at a stretch. In the beginning of your profession, you had to take care of your life. You were there, you have to take care of your office, you have to pay for your court clerk, and then to mend the car. Anyway, a client came in, and since the courts were not functioning, we were not able to go to the client. The court clerks were going. Anyway, a client came and he asked me to send a notice. I did send a notice. When I asked him he asked me for a fees. So for a notice for a recovery of about 3,000 rupees, I asked him 330 rupees. The man laughed. He laughed at me and very jokingly he said, "अरे भाई, हम तो ये fees पूरे केस की देते हैं." Which means that he told me that that 330 rupees was the fee for the entire case, and I had asked for it for a notice. So my uncle also smiled at me, and he said, "Take whatever he is paying to you." That was the client. Somehow he gave me 50 rupees, and then he gave me 10 rupees more for miscellaneous expenses and 10 rupees to my court clerk. So those 70 rupees was my very first earning in my initial stages. In the evening, I went home and I was talking to my father. My father asked me, "How was your first day?" So I told him that this is what had happened. And upon my asking 330 rupees, the man laughed and he paid me 70 rupees in all, of which I could only get 50 rupees. So he said, "What have you done with those 50 rupees?" I said, "I brought it." You should have thrown a party. 50 rupees in 1983 was a good amount. So he said that he told me that next very day you should go and in your chamber where you are sitting with your uncle, you should serve tea to all of them and have a party. Next morning when I was preparing for going to the court, my father gave me a small leaflet, a small pamphlet. Written in it were 3 sentences, I would say, which said, "A lawyer must first get on, then get honor, and then get honest."
True.
And this perhaps became the essence of life and growth for me, as I have experienced over last 35, 36 years of my profession. And rightly so, at that point of time, I was not able to gauge the actual worth of that note. But as I grow in practice, I started realizing how important each and every word of that note was. In the evening, when I came back, during the daytime, the same client came up with another set of notices, 3-4 notices at a time. He gave me, we got it done. And at the end of the day, I again landed up getting about 300 rupees from him. And when I came back home, I told my father that I gave it to my mother and told my father that this is what I have got today. So my father told me, see, what he had paid you that day was out of his own choice. If you have not accepted it, perhaps he would not have come back to you. Since you accepted it, maybe at the advice of your uncle, but since you accepted it, you have honored it. You have respected his wish and desire. And that honor and wish and desire had made you get on. Because initially, unless you get an assignment, unless you get a work, how would you show your mettle? How would you show your worth? How would you show your effort that you are going to make in, or your acumen at law? So my father told me that this is how you have to go. You have to first get on. Get on means get an assignment. But unless you take up an assignment with honesty, you would not be able to get that client back. And unless you get that client back, or unless that client recommends you to someone else, perhaps you have not earned the honor of that client. And these things, get on, get honor, and get honesty, are interchangeable. Are interchangeable subject to your status in life, which I have realized, as I have said.
True.
This interchangeability happens as you grow in your profession.
True, I agree.
Your conviction to the progress, your commitment to the tasks that you are taking up, the assignments that you have with you, and your earnestness with which you consider your client's advice. You see, a client is the best judge of his own case. He knows where does he stand. But one as a professional, I as a professional, it is upon me to see he has his own feelings. He has his own understanding of his life. He has his own understanding of his rights in his own way. But as a lawyer, I perceive and see that when I talk to him as a lawyer, as a professional, he has come to seek a legal advice, a professional advice from me. Because otherwise he knows well what are his rights. So the onus is upon me to evaluate everything in the right perspective of law, as it should be in law. Evaluate what he wants, understand what he wants, draw a balance between his wish and desire, the law, and the precedents, the legal precedents as they go by in law. And to achieve this, the end, the destination, you may win, you may lose. That's a separate thing altogether. Where your honesty comes, or where your legal acumen plays a very vital role, or your honesty and honor plays a very vital role, is to guide your client properly. This is for which he had come to you. Unless you are able to shun away your fear of losing a client by telling him a truth, I think, and I can say with full conviction, with the 36 years of experience at my back, that unless you are able to lose that fear, to shun away that fear and be honest to your client in telling him what you think about his case and how it is going to shape, the outcome is different. Don't be worried about the outcome. I don't think the client is going to come back.
I agree.
But once you are able to do it, once you are able to advise him properly, the way you feel like, once you are able to justify what you are feeling like, That is the stage at which comes the major role of a lawyer. When a client comes to you, I would define it as a Vad, Vivad and Samvad. Vad means case, presentation, requirement, your client's perception of what he seems, what he thinks about his right for which, seeking which he has come to you. Vivad means dispute. What is the dispute of which resolve he is seeking, for which he has come to you? So you have to understand what he wants, what is the Vad. Then you have to understand, you have to argue with him, because you have to bring out the strength and weaknesses of his case with him. And that is the process where you also act as an opponent, because you may be highlighting, you have to highlight the weaknesses of his case to understand the strengths that his case has. Unless you are able to point out those weaknesses to him, perhaps you will not be able to reach to the process by which you have to put forth his case before the court. And then comes a major issue of Samvad. Samvad means discussion, deliberations, arguments, and perhaps consultations. This to me is the core principle of a good practice in law. This also forms the essence of legal practice in court. You have a case put up by way of your pleadings, which is Vad. And in Hindi, the pleadings are also called as Vad. Then you have a counterclaims coming up by the opponents, which is Vivad, the dispute. They highlight the dispute. You raise a question, you raise a dispute from your perspective. The opposite party comes, your opponent comes and raises the dispute from his perspective and the point of dispute between the two of you all. So that makes the Vivad, and then the resolve to it. And that resolve to it may be by after a due and proper trial, after your leading evidences, both the parties leading evidences, and then after leading evidences, arguing the case before the court and the court deciding the matter. At times, the matters get decided in compromise after going to the court by way of process of mediation, conciliation, or the parties negotiating amongst themselves or realizing their. But in this all, I as a lawyer perceives my role in every stage of it. In the stage of my client realizing what his case is all about, how he can and what he can get for his right, what are the benefits and what are the strengths of the opponent for him to give you those benefits, and how the court is going to perceive. So this Vad, Vivad and Samvad is the essence of a legal practice, both in the court and outside the court. Preparing for the going to the court and after coming out of the court.
So what would you say, Rajiv ji, in your opinion, having with the legal as well as personal life, what would you say be those key elements which define the essentials of life and growth in perspective, general growth?
Yes. That's what I'm coming at.
Yes.
You see, what happens is, as I have said, to me, the essence in life, for life and growth is, as a professional, you have to get on, you have to get honor, and then get honest. Because if you go on browbeating about honesty and don't take up the cases saying that no, your client is unjustified, you do not have a case, so I'm not going to take up. Perhaps you are not even going to make a headway in your profession.
True.
You have to analyze.
True.
Your duty is to defend a client. Your duty is to put forth his case, his defense in a proper perspective, in a legal perspective, in conjunction with law of land, in conjunction with, this is where your wisdom plays a very vital role. This is where your acumen as a lawyer plays a very vital role. This is where your intelligence plays a very vital role. So to me as a professional, I would put it that it is a balance between, what happens is that for any decision to take in your life, you have to draw a balance. And that balance, as we have known through our lives, from our childhood by way of the teachings of our teachers, our parents, our family, our friends, and various other ways, that you have to draw a balance. There have to be an alignment between a few principles of life, a few essence of life, which to me would be the only way to succeed. And that process of life and that process of attaining that success comes through drawing up a balance between, as we call in Hindi or Sanskrit, you can say, Atma, Manah, Chit, Buddhi, and Vivek. Atma is your inner self. Mana, Chit is your conscience. Mana is your mind. Buddhi is your intelligence. And Vivek is your conscientiousness. Unless you draw a balance in all these things and all your actions, I as a lawyer, I as a professional, if I take up a matter and I don't apply my conscience to it, my conscious efforts to it, if I don't apply my mind to it, if I don't apply my intelligence to it, and draw up a balance in all these 5 elements, perhaps I may not be justifying my client coming to me.
True, I agree.
This true balance between Atma, Man, Chit, Buddhi, and Vivek. You see, each of these, I may sound to be a preacher, but that's not. It's a practice in life. The 35 years, 36 years in practice in life, which has made you feel and made you understand that unless you are applying yourself in completeness, in entirety, and that entirety involves these 5 elements, you need not to apply, you need not to think it over for time and again. Once, while you are discussing the matter with your client, everything in you gets warmed up. Everything in you gets opened up. Only thing is you have to keep your mind and eyes open. You have to keep your heart open and then apply all these principles, all these systems in unison. And then you are able to reach to a decision to tell your client the strengths and weaknesses of his case. And that pulls through all through the process till a final decision comes by. I again say that win or lose is a daily process. I, as a lawyer, may win a case in a day, may lose another, and may get a third one compromised. So that may not, for me, amount to be my achievement or my success or my failure. Because if I started taking that, I become arrogant. If I take happiness in my success, and if I get depressed with my failure in a particular case, and I became laggard, okay, the court has decided the matter in a compromise, so I have not contributed anything. Perhaps I am not being justified to myself. Because these things are various facets of life which come through, which goes through, and which doesn't matter much. This is what life has taught us.
So do you think positivity is unlocking good luck? I wanted to ask, do you think positivity is the key to unlocking good luck?
Pardon?
Is positivity the key to unlock good luck?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I was about to come to that. You see, positivity is perhaps the only thing in life which plays a very important role. To me, it's a rarity. To me, positivity is a rarity in today's world. I often wonder, people talk about happiness index. I mean, over last 2 weeks, I have been hearing about a good happiness index in some European nations, or a lower in the happiness index in India or any other third world country. I don't agree with that, because in my perception, happiness lies in your heart. Happiness lies in your lifestyle. Happiness lies in your own belief and perception. I find a person sleeping on a pavement happier when he's laughing, when he's enjoying sitting or sleeping at that pavement. For him, that is happiness. For me, perhaps, yes. For some, it may be pecuniary. He may be in poverty. He may not be getting 2 times meal properly. For me, that is a very subjective thing. He may find his happiness in his day-to-day life. A day he may get 100 rupees in begging. He may be happier. Someday he may get 500 rupees. He may be still better. Someday, maybe a flood came by, a rain came by, he is unable to get anything. He may not be happier. So to have it indexed, as people say that this country has a higher, happier index. Why then people there commit suicide of depression?
True, I agree with you.
So it's a very subjective term. So also is success in life. The essence of life today, as it is perceived in today's perspective, mostly people say is possessions, the attainments that we have, the possessions that we have, the acquisitions that we have, the number of cars, the standard of car, the standard of office, the place of your office, the place of your chamber. These today have become the indice of your success in life, which to my mind is very subjective. You don't have an indice for success that way. To me, success is how you define it for yourself. To me, success is is a matter of attitude. Success is someone's own aptitude defined in terms of his attitude. It is how I perceive success for myself within my given circumstances, within my resources, within my means. And if I am able to achieve that success, perhaps I am successful and I am happier that way. Success to me is something very varied, very different from how people perceive it. You only live once. This is my gut feeling. I don't believe in reincarnation, rebirth or anything. You only live once. This is the life we have got. And in this life, what we have achieved, we are evaluated for that in terms of our possessions, acquisitions, attainments, our status in society.
In fact, I like it on this. I was going to come to it. That is, I read today, the positive is inspired by spirituality. It's not religious, spirituality. So how do you see, a soul consciousness or spiritual wisdom or meditation that can induce life and growth?
Again, it's a very subject. I'll just give you a very small incident that had happened to me. A friend of mine, very close friend of mine, was into meditation. He insisted upon me to join this meditation where hundreds of people used to come. But I somehow could not manage it on a Sunday because Sundays used to be my family day. I used to enjoy serving my father the continental breakfast that I used to make for him. And he used to enjoy it. When I got married, my children started growing up, my family started growing up. I started enjoying making that breakfast for my children. And one fine day while we were living in Old Delhi, this mentor asked my friend that why does your friend not come? I have met him once or twice. So he said, I don't know. He said, okay, I would like to go to him. He came to our house in Old Delhi. When he came, we were in the process of preparing for the breakfast. And my father used to love calling people. We used to, since we were in Old Delhi, my whole family was nearby. And he used to call people and then we used to remain busy on that. I met him. He started talking to my father. I was busy. And in the process, about 2 hours went past. After 2 hours, once everybody, including our mentor, Mr. Mathur, was served that breakfast, everybody enjoyed, we started talking. So once we are finished with this entire thing and we set for discussion, he himself took up this issue with my friend Pradeep Low. He said, Pradeep, I realized why he has not been able to come. You see, those spirituality, that meditation, I drew my pleasure, I drew my happiness, I drew my contentment from serving my father and my family that breakfast. For me, that was more important than going on sitting with my eyes closed and probably sleeping down or taking a snap in this process. but I was enjoying. For me, that was my meditation. And I have no hitch in saying that I enjoy mopping the floor in my house. This for me, I can't go for I don't have a knack for going on for a 45 minutes of yoga, for 45 minutes of walk in a park nearby. And this lockdown has come to me as a blessing, because nobody can force me or ask me to go out. And I'm happier doing that mopping up in my house and enjoying it. So you see, it's all very subjective. Everyone has his own feeling in life. Everyone has his own understanding in life of meditation, his own understanding of life, of his spirituality. My spirituality tells me I have to be true to myself. I have to be true to my client. I have to be true to my parents, my family. And I am being honored for my word. That is the true spirituality for me.
So we do have Mohammad Halim Khanji, and we look forward for his issues, because we have had debates on spirituality with him a couple of times in the past. We'll just comment. But I wanted your take on, do you think spirituality, as a matter of fact, helps walk the talk and recalibrate right response to difficult situations?
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, yes. Practically too, if one is able to understand the nuances of his spirituality and his work style, and draw up an alignment, a workable, practical, feasible alignment in that system, I am very sure that the results are going to be very positive. It will always bear a positive result if you are doing a work consciously and conscientiously. Because ultimately, in this whole process, you would not be failing in your duty as a professional, or as an individual, or as a teacher, as a lawyer, or whatever vocation or profession you are having. And this really helps. Spirituality, suddenly we have started talking about spirituality because it has become now a very westernized, accepted and adaptable concept. Spirituality for us comes from within our family. We are told, what is spirituality? It's not reading your Bible or your Quran or your Ramayana or Mahabharata or Gita every day. This spirituality lies within me, my brain, my heart, my soul. Whenever I am doing an act consciously and conscientiously, I am spiritual. I am adhering to my spirituality. And perhaps that I do every day, or that everyone does every day. Because each one of us, whenever we are doing anything, we are aware of what we are doing. Even a thief, when he is committing theft, he is aware that he is committing theft, but that is a way or means to earn his life. He is aware. He is aware that what he is doing is not proper. Spiritually, probably it is not right. Conscientiously, he may not be right. But then he is doing it. He is knowingly, deliberately, he is doing it. So also when we do our tasks every day, we take up our assignments every day, we prepare for them, we work for them. But at the end of it all, whenever we do anything conscientiously and with an alignment, with a proper balance of our thinking, thought process, mind, application, intelligence, we are bound to succeed. Again, I would say, success doesn't mean win or lose a case, because that is a very subjective item again. Back to where we were discussing. Are you there, Aman? Yes, I could see you. Yes, I could see you.
Come on to another issue before you.
Yes.
Today I heard this Buddha's teaching on law of impermanence. And it's a single aspect of manifest reality is state of constant flux.
Constant flux, changeability, right?
Change. Everything is changing with time, and nothing exists permanently.
Yes.
So there. How do you then calibrate it with respect to life and growth?
Change is the essence of life, right? And if you are unable to adapt to change, consciously, conscientiously, and willingly, you will be a laggard. You will be failing in your efforts. If not failing, you will not be succeeding. That's for sure. You have to accept yourself. You have to accept the change. You have to adapt to the change, and you have to be with the change all the time. And that you do consciously or unconsciously. You see, right, your development in your life. As a child, you were dependent upon your parents. Once you grow, you are dependent upon your teachers. But once you appear in your examination, you are dependent upon yourself, your intelligence, right? You see it every day in your institute.
True.
Those students, once they go through their examination, they have to depend upon themselves.
Correct.
That change, that is a change. To me, that is a change. Because from dependence upon a teacher to understand, to put it into writing, what they have understood, to show their mettle, to show their wisdom that they have acquired, to show their intelligence that they have, to the knowledge that they have acquired. That is a change in them. Because then they are performing what they have learned. They have exhibiting what they have learned. That is a change. Unless a student accepts that, understands that, consumes that, assumes those things, and take it to himself, to place it, to expose it, to place it in record, in writing, perhaps he may fail. And so also is life. If you are unable to adapt to the changes in life, in whatever manner it comes to you, it comes as a status, for your being a spinster, to your being a married, for your being a husband or a wife, or and then a parent, and then parent as a grandparent. Same way in your profession, starting as a junior, then becoming an assistant, then becoming a partner, then working as an independent lawyer. So that change is adaptability. That adaptability is an essence of life.
I agree. You see, we see a lot of change in the environment, and it has blossomed with the difficulty which the human race is facing.
Right.
Like all we have been facing I would say every 40, 50 years, we've been facing some difficulty. But the environment has blossomed extensively. Now, given that, I also read another saying by Swami Santaman, the head of Ramakrishna Mission, and where he said the conservation and reverence of nature, reverence of nature, together with healing practices, have been an intrinsic part of the Vedic way of life which we have had. So do you think we are reverting back to that structures, or we could bring in happiness in using some of those very basic principles which we have got lost in time?
COVID-19 situation has made us believe that. To be honest with you, I have written a blog on Facebook in the initial phases of COVID-19 isolation to this effect, that perhaps that was the rightest way of life. Social distancing, maintaining proper distancing, isolating yourself, living with limited means, respecting the environment, respecting the nature. And you see, the bluest of the skies probably in years to come have come in this COVID-19 situation, because I and you are not on the roads.
True.
We are not enjoying the luxuries of our lives, which to us are luxuries which we have earned, we have worked so hard to attain.
Correct.
But then fact of the matter remains that we are enjoying this environment, a beautiful environment outside. It's a different thing that because of the reasons or advisories coming from the ministry and the government from time to time, because of the virus is there, perhaps we are not able to enjoy. But then if you peek out of your window, the sky has never been so blue in many, many years past. The air has never been so good. You see the temperature today, sitting in end of April and going on to May. You are staying in 38 degrees of temperature, when by now, usually it would have been 40, 45 degrees.
Correct.
So that's how the conservation and preservation of nature takes its own recourse. You see, this is what I mean by adaptability to change. Some has feel this lockdown COVID-19 situation as a withdrawal symptom. I am enjoying every day of it. Yes, when it comes to professional system, I am suffering. Everybody else is suffering for that matter. We may not be able to get what we are, but what is important is that you are able to be with you. You are able to be with your family. You are able to understand your family well. You are able to understand yourself well. You are able to talk to people, your friends, whom you have perhaps might have not spoken in last 30 years because
True.
you got so involved in all your dirty days nuances. So this
True.
is an opportunity.
True. I have
I mean, I for once, honestly speaking, a friend of mine introduced me to a singing platform, and I started singing, and I realized that in the last few months I have recorded over 80 songs. So that is what, and that is how you can enjoy the life in adversities. This is all a human nature. This is all a human nature.
Yes.
The moment you adapt it, I could have had a withdrawal symptom. I could have gone into depression because of not being able to go to my profession to get the money which I used to get every day from my clients, the fees that I may collect. But then I realized that this is also a time when I could write what I have in my heart.
Correct.
I am
Correct.
not drafting a pleading at the asking of my client. I am
Correct.
drafting a letter or a blog, what I feel myself, what I enjoy writing.
Correct.
Without fear, without any fear of how the court may take it, without any fear of how the other party may take it, without any fear of how one may perceive it. I am able to do it in my own self, to please my own self. And I'm happy with that.
I'm very happy to hear that.
Yeah.
I have 3 last questions before I open the house for question and answer in another 10 minutes. So we can contain the answers in 10 minutes. What do you think? You know, you have, I know you have had political favorites and non-favorites, but not involving them as such. But you have seen not only government of India, but various governments across. You know, in judiciary, you have come across, you handle cases from across the globe. So what do you think governments, they have been doing various steps, whether it was employment or jobs or slowdown or clinical problems like this today, or even the environment. As a matter of fact, we had a young girl address the UN Parliament this time recently in a meeting about the environment. So given various problems which have been faced by various governments across the globe, they have taken multiple actions. But what do you think they could do, maybe in few words, about to ensure smooth induction of growth and happy living as a way of life?
You see, in the process of so-called globalization, we have somewhere, to my mind, my political convictions aside, as an Indian, when I put it, I am very positive in feeling that in the process, in the race of globalization, we have forgotten our strengths. Our strength lied in our agriculture, in our villages, in our cottage industry, in our regional cottage industries, business. We have forgotten. And unfortunately, in last decade or so, there had been absolute, I mean, though the current government has started talking in Make in India, Made in India, and bringing up these things. I don't know what actual effort is going down the line, down the drain to whether it is reaching to the masses, whether it is reaching to the villages or not. But the growth of that thing, to me, the growth of indigenous trade, the indigenous business, the growth and support to those cottage industries work, and a belief that what we are going to get perhaps is the same quality. I'll just give you a very small example, Amanji. About a few years back, I was in Sydney. I was walking in a mall with my brother-in-law. I found a coat hanging there, a beautiful coat. I looked at it, but when I looked at the price tag, I found it to be very expensive and I left it. My brother-in-law asked me to wear it. I tried it because somehow it was an excellent coat. I tried it, but then, and my brother-in-law said that, no, you buy it. I said, sorry, I am not going to pay that much of money for this coat. So I left it there. Next week, again, we went there. This time my wife was also there and she also had an eye on that coat. So my brother-in-law told him that Rajiv has tried it, but he says that it is expensive. So my wife asked me to try it again. I tried again. The manager, the floor manager came to me and he said that it's perfectly fitting to you. Why don't you go for it? I said, it's too expensive, so I'm not going to buy. He said, he asked me if, he said, sir, can you come on Thursdays? I said, why? I said, no, please come on Thursday and I'll see if I can get you some good offer. So anyway, we went Thursday because Thursdays used to be our open day for sales and everything else there. Thursday I went there and fortunately for me, he reduced the price by about 60%. So it came within my range of purchase. I purchased that coat. When we went back to our home, to my sister-in-law's house, and while everybody was appreciating it, to my shock and surprise, when I looked, suddenly my eyes fell on the label. I found that it was fabricated in India. So I bought it in Australia. You see, that is what I want to put it. You have Pradas, you have all the polo t-shirts, you have Gucci and Van Heusen's and all there. But in this whole process, what we are losing, what we are gaining, perhaps maybe an international exposure of some of our business houses and the businesses. But what we are losing is much larger. I may have had bought that instead of that coat, a local tweed coat for almost half the price, but might have served at least 5 persons who might have been involved in this whole process of attaining that. So to my mind, the government, whichever government is there, the government is trying its very hard and they are propagating it, make in India, made in India. And now even for the COVID testing kits also, they are saying that we have to go on for India. That self-reliance is very important. And the reliance and the belief that we can do it better than many others, and we are doing it better than many others. You see this COVID-19 situation. Again, I'm falling back on that. What the government has taken, what the Prime Minister has taken, or what the government has suggested, that isolation. Perhaps that's the only thing which has worked your way. All developed nations in the world, with all the research and development that they have had, with all the infrastructure they may have had, the ships that they have in the sea, taking care of 3,500 people, but they have about 20,000 people dying there. We are still contented with only over 1,000 or so. So with that limited resources, with our limited resources, but a conscious effort, we have been able to contain the loss, the damage.
True.
And similarly, we are able to help us. We would have saved a lot of foreign exchange by not importing kits, by not getting medicines. It's ultimately the hydroxychloroquine which we are making in the world now, which world is asking for us. So we have to have that faith in ourselves and that trust in ourselves.
I agree.
That we are best and we can, and people are looking for us.
Correct. I'll take only one more question from you because there are lots of questions from the audience and I would like to take them up in the next 15-20 minutes. The last question from me. Do you think life is all about money and power?
No, not for me. Money, for me, honestly speaking, and you know it well, and I think you will vouch for that also. That money for me has never been that important in my life. What is important for me is growth. And that growth, the indice for growth is not the money that you have. The indice for growth is not the Mercedes or the Audis that you are driving or the bungalows that you are living in. For me, growth means the intrinsic growth. My contentment, my satisfaction, my being contented with what I have is growth for me. The honor that I may have in the eyes of people is the growth for me. The honor which I realize when the client comes back to me after years, after a decade of my handling his case, is the growth for me. If you are not losing a client in last 30, 35 years of your practice as a lawyer or as any professional, that is the indice of proper growth for you. Money, yes, it flows in. It flows in. Just as you grow in your life, You get honor, you get honesty, you get business, you come into business, you play your role properly, money keeps flowing in. But that cannot be the indice of growth for me, which unfortunately is the essence of life today. That's a difficult part of it. And in that mad race, everybody has fallen. I am also. I don't say that I do not fall in that race. But then, yes, when you say that whether it is to me the indice of growth, I say no, not to me.
Now we'll open the house for question and answers. And the next three people I'll be asking the opening of the channels for is Professor Rekha Jagannathan, and after that Mohammad Halim Khanji, and after that Osa from Sweden. So Rekha ji, I will be opening up your session now. Just a second. Give me a second so that I can set it accordingly. I'm sorry, I'm a little slow on.
No issue. We all are free to enjoy it.
Yes. I'm
Dr. Aman Agarwal, and then thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Rajiv Saxena ji. It was really very fortunate hearing you. You are a great jurist.
No. I can't, neither I can claim to be a great jurist, nor that. That's only how I think and I live my life.
I'm fortunate to have met the Supreme Court Chief Justice Venkatachalaya. You must be knowing him too.
Yeah, very well.
I have great reverence for you all jurists. So I would like to ask you a very relevant question, which may be mind-boggling at this moment. As you already said, COVID-19 has brought in several changes in the very mindset. We have had a shock to begin with, and with this shock, we have had series of changes being discussed. The present government, as soon as it ascended, started distracting and bringing in changes, beginning with Planning Commission dismantling, and several changes are contemplated also, including civil service changes.
Yes.
At this juncture, do you think we should also go for constitutional shake-up and then bring in several changes? Or you think it will be just a bubble point where this COVID-19 will repeat every year and we'll have a vaccine and then just go on with our life again? What is your opinion about this?
Rekha ji, may I ask you a question? What do you perceive as constitutional changes in the first instance? Because again, I may have my own thought about constitutional changes that should come by.
Yeah.
Can I get to know what you think, what you expect as constitutional changes to be brought up?
At undergraduate level, I was a student of political science, and we had a very great political science teacher who taught us the Constitution, Indian Constitution, as if it were coming alive, the way it was formed.
Right.
There were great deliberations by all the freedom fighters, including Ambedkar. We had Jawaharlal Nehru participating, and then there were great minds deliberating over what should be in the Constitution and what should not be. There we finally decided for secular India, and we also ascertained rights and duties. And by the decades, as we come by to 7.5 decades, we have too much of liberty, and then we have media really uncontrollable, becoming biased, people not listening to anyone. Except this COVID situation, we have never really been so disciplined at all. And then now it's a question of being alive or dead. So we just went for survival, I feel. So when we have had a shock, it will be easy to take changes. We need great changes, like some disciplined democracy. Sometimes we have discussed whether democracy is a wrong system for us. Karl Marx many times said it is. I just wonder how a country like India is being governed. And it's about regionalism as well. We had Vallabhbhai Patel, who actually integrated all the states and made it linguistic states. And then we all have made him superhuman and installed a huge statue of his. We are very good at installing statues. But then should we go for a change in the attitude of dividing states by linguistic premise? Should we change that? And then liberty is being disciplined with more constraining duties.
Yes.
These are the points I would like to discuss. You will be knowing more.
To talk about the first part of your first leg of your
Yes. Yeah. Flow.
I feel that this is a passing phase like any other phase. Yes, the impact is much larger, much deeper, and much fiercer. But then it will pass away. It's a darker night. It's like an eclipse which has come to your life, which has come to our life. But in last 40 days of lockdown, perhaps every one of us have worked out our own way to live it.
Yes.
To live it conveniently, successfully, and enjoyably. Very few perhaps may not be comfortable with that for want of things which perhaps they might have been enjoying, which are not available today to them.
Yes.
They may come if this continues for another 15 days, perhaps they may also come to terms with that life.
Yes.
So it's a passing phase and it will go by. That's human nature. That's human nature. Just as we grow in our life, our activities slows down, our mental activities grows, but physical activities slows down. We adapt to it. That intrinsic adaptability would ultimately make us live this system and see it go by. The aftermath of it, as Aman also looked at as a finance expert and as an economist, perhaps may see very, very many changes. And if we are righteous in our approach to these changes, perhaps we will become a world leader. But if we would fall in the gamut of bloody politics that we always does, then we would end up as a loser.
Yes.
Constitutional amendments, whether you amend constitution or not, it is the attitude and the acceptance of our own rights which matters. You see, in COVID-19 situation, as of now, despite being aware of the directions of the advisories that have come by, which the nation is adopting, you still find people every day going out on the roads, acting against, protesting against those poor, I would say called poor, who are risking their life for saving us.
Yeah.
Right? So whether you amend constitution or not, these sort of people will remain there. The governments, the courts, the jurists, the system has to be strong enough to take a call on it strongly, to take a call on it sometime beyond politics, beyond religion, and beyond the realm of life. You have to act as a good administrator, as a strong administrator, to avoid such sort of things and to keep the interests of the nation and its citizens paramount. Unless we are able to have that conviction, which I often write about, which I often feel. I am a hardcore congressman, I must say, by my conviction. But then the way things happen, but to be honest, I have no inhibition in saying so. People like me that way and I enjoy it. But the way Mr. Modi or his government has been tackling this situation, I'm happy with it. I would not even for once try to avoid or try to not accept what is falling for the government. Ultimately, he is the Prime Minister of the nation. I respect him as the Prime Minister of my nation.
Yeah.
And my commitment is, my political commitments apart, my political thinkings, inhibitions apart. Once a person gets elected to a post, he gets elected on a mass support. He acquires a status of a leader of a nation. He represents us all, irrespective of, yes, he may have his own preferences, biases, prejudices, thoughts which he might want to implement. He may have his own inhibitions. But then as a leader of a nation, I believe that everyone should follow, strictly follow. Next election would come. We may have a time to express our views, to try our luck there, and then we may succeed. Constitutional amendments, as you talk about, our constitution is very strong. And we have seen that the amendments that have come by in the past have led to more confusion than clearing the cloud.
True.
Some of them, whether in constitution, whether in CPC, whether in our other codes of statutory codes, are like patches, you know, on a very nice fine fabric, which have been woven in warp and weft by our the framers of our constitution, by our leaders in the past. Why that has happened is that probably we are more guided by our political convictions than a national outlook. To me, that national belongingness somewhere has missed down the last 70 years. Our political convictions have overawed our ambitions for bringing up or for raising our nation. And that perhaps had been putting us behind from what we should have achieved by now. No constitutional amendment to that extent is likely to help much. The constitution as it exists today, yes, what requires is a change of attitude.
Huh.
You see, in our legal system, the constitution apart, ultimately constitution is to be implemented through the process of our CPC, CRPC, IPC, and evidence. These four taken together guide our legal system, our litigation system, or a legal system, juristic system. Those being part of a feudal framework, as they have been framed at that point of time, are the ones that require changes. I strongly feel that feudalistic pattern of evidence, that feudalistic system of governance, which was actually to be protected by way of these constitutional mandate or statutory mandates in terms of CPC, CRPC, IPC, and Evidence Act, needs change, needs massive change, and needs massive change to not only bring about a balanced approach to trials, but also to bring about and promote expediency, to reduce the time frame that is being taken in leading, in reaching to a proper adjudication of a matter concern.
True.
So to my mind, much of constitutional changes are not likely to help anyway.
Sir, actually, this federalism, for instance, as an economist,
Yes.
in the federal structure, we have copied either Britain or United States, and it's a patch-up between the two that has made the constitution.
Yes.
There, they are just an integration of regions. So we have 2 levels of governance instead of 3 levels of governance. But then in India, we have had the concept and dream of Ram Rajya, including Gandhiji. Everyone thought of local self-government. Mm-hmm. Now, at this point of COVID-19, we need a very strong local government. And only in, I think it was in 1991, we accepted in constitution that there is local level governance, the 3rd level of governance. Now, this kind of things have to be really changed in constitution. The federal structure has...
May I ask you a very honest comment on it? You have had the experience of the so-called local self-government in Delhi.
Yes.
Please don't mind my asking it. Are you happy with that? Opinion on that?
My people are there in Delhi, and then I do read Delhi local governance intensely. I find that...
I am a Delhiite and I am not pleased with it. And honestly, I would like, you see, that conflict of power, of power between the state and the center, Delhi being a siege of center, should have remained a national capital region in a strict sense. I do not find any development or any good for Delhi as a state. So that federalism, what you are talking about, or the center-state relationship is defined or is governed by our attitudes. Delhi had done wonderfully well under Mrs. Sheila Dikshit.
Sheila Dikshit, yes. They did well.
Despite the fact that for the last of her phase, there was a BJP government at the center. The center and state had a perfect relationship.
if I may
had a
intervene.
perfect relationship. But then why it has failed? Why that example has failed in the next phase? You see, it's again a matter of perception, attitude and aptitude. How do you perceive it? So
Dr.
changes in
Jagannathan, if I may
constitution,
intervene.
The present, I think
for the
Kejriwal has
statutory
done
mandate is not going to change much unless you
not-
change your attitude.
You mean constitution is fine? It is a divine document and we don't
I
need to
don't
change.
say it is a divine document, but it is a document well written and which can preserve our systems well if they are properly implemented and if it is properly
Dr.
taken up
Jagannath,
in its right perspective.
Dr. Rajanji, if I can intervene,
Please.
we will request, I will pass you numbers to each other and we will have this discussion over.
Oh,
Right.
no, sure. We will have some time else. We can
Thank
have a
you.
long discussion on this issue.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And then I conclude that you have great respect for our constitution, and I do agree too. And I am also highly secular. But then, when we globalize ourselves, when we go out, we have to answer several questions related to our constitution,
Yes.
where we have a lot of skepticism. I'll talk to you later on. Very nice getting to know you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Jagannathan, incidentally, has been a former member of the Karnataka State Planning Board. I
Great.
forgot to introduce him.
Great having met at Jurista.
Except for my
Thank
own
you, sir.
conviction, I must have made out a point. Thank you.
Excellent getting to know you.
Thank you.
So is currently professor at Petronas University, Malaysia, but is from Japan originally and has been with Waseda University. Please.
Good afternoon,
Okay.
sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for your nice talk. I'm very much impressed of your talking.
Thank you, sir.
I have several questions comparing between Indian culture and Japanese culture. So you are jurist, and Indian law has a background of British. The law, British law, the maybe how can I say, English common law. Behind is common law, but as you told, Indian culture has the background of mana or something more higher state of concept. Indian people follow such the concept. Maybe Indian law was built based on this, but United States law system is based on constitutional law. It is a supreme law. All people should follow. Or it is different between British and the United States. Also, Japanese law is a little bit different. Before World War II, as you know, the emperor was a god. We should follow emperors. But after World War II, we followed American advising. We lost the election. So maybe our generation lost the generation. We do not have any believing things. Younger generations might be different. Older generation, I'm quite old, but anyway, older than me is different. So how do you think about the mana was behind the law or supreme law in Indian culture? I found various incidents in India, such how can I, India does not have a death sentence, right? India does not have a death sentence. Japan has. We should need this, I think. But sometimes it is not how can I say, be accepted of Indian decision. I cannot explain clearly.
I'll get back to you and then we can discuss, Mr. Vazda.
How do you think about this? Next, I ask the daily life and globalization.
Right. Yeah, sure. You see, Mr. Utada, I have found you to be very, very Japanese centric and oriented person, and it's good. You are proud of your culture. I am proud of my culture. What I could perceive from your question is that whether that globalization and our acceptance to the modern technique, model system, modern system of law, and have in any case pervaded or in any case helped India in attaining anything. Is that it? You want to ask? My answer to that would be, you see, as I have spoken, change is the essence of life. We have our spiritual guidances, we have our spiritual tenets and scriptures, which has provided us a way of life. Hinduism, as you know, is a way of life. It's not a religion. In fact, we normally mistake Hindu as a religion. It is a way of life which has been explained, and anybody and everybody who accepts that way of life adopts it, and it becomes a religion for him because he follows that pattern of life. So Hinduism is a way of life. So also we have the Vedic system of law. We have our Vedic scriptures. We have Puranas. Ages, through ages, we have come through a process of adaptation. We adapt the system as time comes by. Perhaps in Japan also. Japan is the most ideal country for anyone to watch. The spirit of Japanese, the earnest, honest, sincere endeavors that have been made by the country and every countryman in Japan is to be followed by someone, with everyone. I have greatest of respect for Japan and Japanese so far as their commitment to the nation and development is concerned, and a balanced and disciplined lifestyle is concerned. Though I have never been to Japan, but yes, I have seen the way it is. And for that matter, India and Japan have too much in common when it comes to sharing in terms of development. Very many projects in India are being financed and funded by Japan, and perhaps doing very good for India as a nation and Indians as a class.
In my young days, we learned the Indian culture, history.
Sure.
Gandhi or Nehru, this influenced our generation.
Yes.
And you told growth is most important for you, right? Right. Implicitly or explicitly, if we consider growth, we should have some direction.
Yes.
Maybe mana in your case. So how do you think about globalization? If I worried in my young days, 1970, India was social country. They did not open India. If they opened like China, maybe a more developed India, right. But closed just recently. So it makes delay, right, to develop India.
Yes.
But if, of course, I support globalization is important. But if you take a globalization, how do you think about behind the culture or mana? Is it the same outside of India? You should accept other culture from the outside. How do you think?
So Radha, I would just remind you of what some excerpts from what Mr. Deepak Vohra, Professor Deepak Vohra had discussed with you. I saw that, so I am aware. And I would just like to reiterate a few of what he has shared with you. You see, till 70s, India was in a race of developing. India was a developing nation as I could see it. We were developing, we were taking care of our masses, we were developing our educational system, we were self-dependent. We were a nation which could not feed its people. We still from 65 to 71, we have very many droughts and floods and so many things that we had to import the food grains. Despite being predominantly an agricultural nation, we were importing food grains and food items just to feed our nation. But then a very honest, committed effort by the governments then towards self-reliance, despite the globalization that was setting in the world, in many other countries like Japan, with the help of other nations like US, UK, and other nations developing forward, India took a concerted and conscious effort of developing self-reliance. And today, as we speak, we are one of the largest nations for supplies of certain food grain articles to the world. We are self-dependent, self-reliant when it comes to wheat. We are self-dependent, self-reliant when it comes to rice, which is the essential food requirement for our nation. Poverty line is definitely reducing. Job opportunities are opening. Since this small phase of COVID-19 overall, if you see in larger perspective, the nation with its vast population, perhaps the second largest in the world, has been able to reach to a stage despite not starting up globalization at a very early stage of our development, where we are able to be self-reliant on very many spheres or sectors. Yes, globalization has its own impact, as I said, that in that process, somewhere down the line, our own industry has suffered. But the shining ray of hope is that with the current impetus being given to make in India, to develop indigenous business houses and businesses, perhaps the younger generation, the next generation to come, may be able to bring about a certain self-reliant and self-dependent development in the nation, which perhaps is going to have larger impact in terms of economic growth of the nation. So also in Japan. You see, over-dependence upon any nation for that matter, as you have said, that over-dependence on US, you have started following US system. I don't think that you should be worrying about how the younger generation would take. This cycle of progress is ongoing. When we were young, when you were young, perhaps you might have adopted something which your parents were not aware about, which your parents were not exposed to. You might have developed, as Aman had pointed out, that you had been in Malaysia for Petronas and now you are back to Japan. Your parents might have not traveled to Malaysia or any other part, may not have, or may have. That's the way of life. Change, adaptability is a way of life. We have to live with the times. And while living with the time, if we make a conscious effort and conscientious effort to grow within our limitations, within our means, within our resources, then I'm sure that that growth is viable, that growth is acceptable, and that growth is something of which we should be proud of.
Okay, thank you very much
For
your today's nice talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I want to request Mohammad Aleem Khan Saab, who has been a former Secretary Government of India and also spoken at this forum before, if we can, I'll have his question. Mohammad Aleem Khan. I know spirituality with him a couple of times, and I'm looking forward to having more, but I thought I should bring him in.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Rajiv.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
I'm sorry, my camera is not on because there is some problem of signal here.
Oh.
So I hope you don't mind somebody without face talking to you.
Sir, you got such a sonorous voice that nobody would
Great.
mind it.
Great, thank you. And frankly speaking, when I heard something you talked about spirituality, I was really enthused because I had a lot of discussion with Professor Aman about spirituality, and according to, the way I have been relating to him, my perception of life was that you have been given a body and you have been given a mind to guide your body. Now,
Perfect.
when you go into a spirituality cell, what
Right.
you do probably is that you make your body to serve your mind rather than mind serving your body. So that is where that, because I thought if I have to live, I have to serve my spiritual requirement by going into going into a cave or running away from the society. Then
Right.
there was no need for me to be born among a family. You
Yes.
know, just like in the forest, a lot of trees grow,
Right.
and they bloom also. So my concept of life and growth, as I have explained in my discussion with Professor Aman, is that if you can't love fellow human beings, if you can't have compassion for the people who are in need, and if you cannot work as a team in a cooperative, participative way, then you are as good or as bad. You don't remain a social animal, or you only remain an animal.
Yes.
So for me, if you have to be a good social animal, then you have to have these three basic criteria. So when you talked about that, I mean, the spirituality, the talk of spirituality per se does not enthuse you. I found somebody whom I found very close to my heart, and I must
Thank
thank
you.
you for
Thank you.
thank you for that.
Mhm.
And I'm very grateful for this opportunity given by Aman to to talk to you. But see, but now having said this, then we have a tendency to talk about much bigger things, like spirituality is one of them. I hope one of the questioner will not mind my saying so. Changing the constitution, another, changing the character of the society and bringing nationalism into every individual's head. These are few bigger issues which being talked about. We are, but at the same, you might have heard a lot of WhatsApp messages in which we talk about we should give, if we give 1 rupee per day or 1 paisa per day, we can contribute so much to the national building.
Right.
But when we talk all these things, when it comes to doing yourself,
Right.
I mean, at one point of time, we are talking about contributing 1 rupee per day, and at the same time, we are not willing to give our taxes properly. So
That's the irony.
that is my point. You know, for example, we will go 5 times to a mosque to give prayer, but when we sit in a shop, I don't mind selling a second-hand material at a higher cost. It comes with all the religions and all. So my point is that if whatever you are doing day-to-day basis, the way you are interacting with your fellow being, if you are not guided by the compassion and thing, then how can we talk about the larger issue of spirituality? So according to me, I feel somewhere in this phase, our country is going through a different type of dichotomy. We talk of bigger things, but when we start doing it, we stoop to very lower levels. Now, how you feel that this dichotomy can be brought to face? Because if I say that you say bigger things and doing smaller things in the garb of doing bigger things, then I become a person who is not proud of my nation.
Right.
Now that is a much bigger issue here. That, see, you have to say something which others feel is the right thing to say, irrespective of the fact whether you do it or you don't do it. So this dichotomy, which is going into the mind of our I mean, inadvertently into our youth, how to address it, and what are your practical measures which you like to suggest?
Khan Sahab, thank you very much for sharing my views on spirituality. At the same point of time, if I would just remind you that during the course of my discussion in the initial stages itself, I have said that we talk a lot, but what we have to do, whatever we have to do, once we do it with due sincerity, with a conscious mind, a conscientious approach, and with our heart to it, perhaps then only we will be able to reach to the destined target. I strongly feel, and I always advocate, that over a period of time, uh, for 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 our uh, in the background of our political perceptions, political inhibitions, we all have forgotten the nation. The most important thing that is lacking in our generation, perhaps my generation I can talk about, is the sense of national belongingness. The moment we start thinking as Indians, to tell you honestly, in my earlier phase of life, I had an opportunity of getting an assignment or a placement in Canada. I had just been married at that point of time. I had got a job permit in a law firm with an assurance of 2 visits to India. But I consciously opted out of that option. I consciously decided to stay back in India. And I have, until about past few years, I had no repentance on that. As you have very rightly put it, I'm thankful to you for putting up my thoughts in your own perspective. I had absolutely no repentance in my decision of not going to Canada. But now what is happening in past few years, the way people are spoiling the national fabric for their own limited, for their own inhibitions, for their own, what do you call, mindless communalism or concepts. I have started feeling that perhaps I may not have been right when it comes to discussing about the future safety, security, and status for my own children. This is the time why I as a father, perhaps because of growing age, I may have that difficulty or that thought process. But then, yes, I share the views with you. The time has come when the nation has to take a call as a nation for extending development to all sects and sectors of society in a same pattern and the same manner. I am reminded of a very valid argument by Professor Deepak Vora of trust development. That absence of trust, perhaps, is leading to this situation. We have to develop trust in every Indian. We don't have to act as feudal lords of mistaking every individual as being at fault or as being at or belittling his conviction, commitment, belongingness to the nation. We have to treat every Indian at par, and the government must, I must say, not only the government, it is the duty cast upon every single political party in the country who had a political or a public base to see that every citizen of India is respected as an Indian. Somehow, as I have said earlier, the laws were such that they themselves had created that distrust. I was asked a question the other day when I was talking to someone that perhaps the courts doesn't take businessmen's honesty. I disagree with that. On a webinar, somebody asked me when some doctors were talking about the issues that when the business houses goes to the court, they are not taking on their face and the courts distrust them. I don't think that is the scenario. Only a person who is not coming up fairly, you see, a court tackles 100 cases a day. So the moment you open your mouth in the court, or the moment the court opens your file, they get a fair idea of what you are asking and what you are not asking, or what you are aiming to ask in the garb of your pleadings, voluminous pleadings. Now that is what matters. If you are honest to what you are asking, you can immediately gain the trust of the court. You can immediately gain the trust of the people. You can immediately gain the trust of the youth. So what is required is a consensuous effort by the state, by the government. When I say state, by government, whosoever is the political party in governance, and those in administration. Unless they trust the people at large, people cannot have trust in them. So that, to my mind, is most important, and it is a requirement of the day. And in this COVID-19 situation, it is all the more necessary. We have all seen what had happened. I don't want to bring it about. I don't want to discuss it, because somebody's fault cannot be made a fault for the entire community or the entire country. And it cannot be done. What has been done cannot be undone. Only thing is that it has to be rectified, remedied, and seen that yes, no further damage is caused. But yes, time has come that instead of first concentrating on wider issues, we must talk on smaller issues. We must start self-reliance. We must have self-dependence. We must harp upon and see to it that the national belongingness increases, that people have trust in the nation, and nation has a trust in the people also. I think that could be the cardinal principle for any development, balanced development of the nation to come by.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
I'll go to Dr. Poonam Sethi. She is Assistant Professor in Hindu College, Delhi University, your alma mater, and where you were on the EC. I hope there's no EC issue which is going to be discussed today.
I have very many issues to discuss when it comes to university, but that apart, most welcome, Dr. Sethi.
Dr.
So thank you, Professor Raman, for this opportunity, and hello, Mr. Rajiv.
Welcome, Doctor. Namaskar.
I've been listening to you very keenly, and I think the participants have already raised number of questions, and I think partly my query has also been answered, but yet I would like to put forward my views on this, that with all the wonderful experiences that you've just talked about of your life, in a way, you have portrayed lawyers and the legal profession in a very positive light. And
we are positive. Don't mistake us to be negative.
And I agree. But and personally, also, I have a lot of friends in this profession, who have helped me fight my legal battles. I am in the court for a number of reasons, presently also, and in the past also.
So you would not repent having lawyers as friends?
Definitely not. And that's what I'm saying. I had my wins, and
Good.
That has really put my faith in the system. I agree, but that's my personal viewpoint.
Right.
But on a larger, macro level, I have observed that we have studied as a student of, political science and all. We've studied that judiciary is supposedly independent of the executive.
Right.
Right. All these years, we've studied that. But what I have recently observed is that some of the most sensible decisions, have been struck down by the courts. And somehow, sometimes you find that there is now no predictability about the judgments that are likely to come. And every party is just about as jittery, even the ones, who are very upright, and those who had been who have resorted to the court because it was very necessary, it being the last measure that they had for redressal of their grievances. But then the unpredictability of the judgments has really kind of overshadowed the judiciary as an autonomous body. So one thing that I want you to speak on or kind of throw some light, what do you think that the legal system change about itself to win back the faith of the people and also bring back the positivity that is the essence of life?
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Sethi. To be very straight in your submission. In the first instance, I must say, yes, a lot of debate is going on these days, especially in last 2 years, regarding the independence of judiciary, which definitely has suffered a lot of setback. I totally agree with your feeling that in past 2, 3 years, judiciary has definitely made itself a matter of discussion, and more importantly or saddeningly regarding its independence. A lot of discussion is happening. My organization was amongst the first one to take up this issue when we had Justice Thakur talking on these issues about the independence of judiciary when 4 of the judges had spoken against the Chief Justice. And India International Center, when we have been taking up these issues time and again at various forums. But yes, as our constitutional framework is, the judiciary has to take up that necessary remedial action, that exercise to bring back its lost glory itself. Time has come because you see, any indulgence by government would become a pressure on judiciary. Any indulgence by government to see that this system, if you would remember, there had been a lot of talks about National Judicial Commission regarding appointment of judicial officers. And after a lot of deliberations, discussions, court arguments, and a lot of media coverage and media fight going on, ultimately that had been struck down. And the judiciary decided to take a recourse of its own appointments as regards the appointment of higher judicial officers are concerned to justice.
Yes.
I, for one, as a practicing lawyer, have great faith in judicial system. You see, what we see today on our day-to-day life are not the n number of cases which are decided by our judicial officers. The pressure on judicial officers kindly be imagined. I and you as individual might be dealing, I as a lawyer might be dealing 4, 5, 10, 20 cases a day. A judicial officer sitting even at the level of Supreme Court had to deal with over 100 cases a day. Is it humanly possible for a person to even take up a file, read the last order, take a conscious decision and pass a judgment on it? So somewhere down the line in this whole process, delay is one aspect, and taking a decision, a judicious one at that. There are too many things. Of late, the media has started playing a massive role in every sphere of our life. Unfortunately, the media trials have taken place, which to my mind, I am a strong advocate against those media trials. Because we all are human beings, the judges are also human beings. No doubt, they have a higher credibility sitting up there and representing the court of law, a judge. A very senior lawyer and a very senior judge, we were in a discussion, he said that just remember that out of hundreds of lawyers become a good lawyer in practicing in high court or a district court. Out of hundreds and thousands of them become a judge in a district court. And then out of those hundreds and thousands of them become a high court judge and a Supreme Court judge. So a person who is sitting in this seat of judgment perhaps is representative of the Lord, and that is why he is called my Lord. He represents the Lord. And as you have rightly said, that everybody goes there as seeking justice at the last point of seeking justice. But then, yes, all are human beings. The judges are also human beings. What you come to see, how you perceive your case is one's individual perception, one's individual mindset. When I present a case from the perspective of my client, from what my client requires me to present it, and from what my client desires or want or wish. This wish and desire may not be something in larger interest when a judge sitting as a third person or as an independent person, not affected by anybody's personal perceptions or requirements or wish or desire, decides. So what he decides is something which is a balance in terms of law, which is mandated in statutes, which is given under the precedents, which is decided by way of precedents, and a judicious approach is taken while adjudicating that issue. So I, for once, would not say that largely the judicial system is not fair, or largely the judicial system is impressed upon or impacted upon by various things. But yes, certain important decisions and they have been happening ever since. We are a democratic nation. We have aspirations. Everybody has his own aspirations, their own limitations, own imaginations, and their own requirement. Perhaps, yes, sometimes judicial officers may also err in taking their decisions or in passing their judgment. But I must remind you that when the court sits in judgment in cases which are reported in newspapers and which I and you read in newspapers, they are decided not by one person. They are decided by 3 persons or 2 persons together. So it is the collective wisdom of 3 judicial officers or 3 judicial, topmost judicial officers, which grants that mandate. So we have to evaluate it in as many terms. Time and again in our profession, we see that even a constitutional bench judgment is reviewed by a 2 judges bench because it has its own perception. They can distinguish the case. I may rely upon that a constitutional bench or a full bench judgment. Sorry, but the judge, but the bench sitting there, 2 judges, very ably distinguished my submissions, especially in relation to that full bench judgment, and made an observation, which when I read and when I introspect and when I read in context of my case and otherwise, I feel that yes, they may be right. So what happens is that we get overawed by what is being presented to us on day-to-day basis by the media, what is being projected by way of discussions by people for their own limited resources and intelligence. And yes, I'm not saying that they are not impressed upon or they are not having any pressure or the judgments are not justifiable. But then it happens. But largely, I must say, people still have faith in judiciary for the reason that judicial officers and judiciary, more importantly, the lower judiciary, had been able to let people have that trust in them. They have not failed the people. They have not failed the system. We may find some case which we want in a certain way to be decided, to have not been decided. That is a different story. But largely, people still have faith in a judgment. And I, as a practicing lawyer, would definitely say that largely the judicial system in the country is still incorruptible for the checks and balances that are available, because every case passes through various stages. It goes up to Supreme Court. And a person fighting for his right never, howsoever limited resources he may have, would never leave anything in his bag to fight for his right.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that balanced viewpoint. I'm really, really impressed. Thank you very much.
There are multiple questions, but given the time, I'm going to limit it to last question now by Dr. Yamini. And I apologize to about 5 of other people who wanted to ask questions at different places.
If we can have in short run up other questions as well.
Last question by Dr. Yamini.
Okay.
Dr. Yamini.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, my
Good
question is
Right.
that, the judicial system in India has been the strongest pillar of democracy.
Yeah.
And even the recent controversies of the 4 judges coming to the media, as well as questioning the appointment of a former Chief Justice to Rajya Sabha, has been a movement towards strengthening the democracy in the view of the reforms that are needed in the judicial system. What do you think should be the most imminent reforms that would strengthen the system and the democratic process to uphold the constitutional rights of an individual?
Sure. Very nice. Sure. Yamini, in the first instance, so far as nomination of the former Chief Justice to Rajya Sabha is concerned, I, for one, have been asking my judicial who have been active in their initial practicing life in politics also, to take up these positions. Why not? Why should a judge be not a member of parliament? That is one question. I may have debated it That's a different issue. In this particular circumstance of the Chief Justice taking it, because there are too many discussions, too many exposures, too many issues that have been brought in. But generally speaking, I would advocate for person from any walk of life, irrespective of whether he had been a Chief Justice of India, a judge of a High Court, or a judge of a district court, or a police officer, or anywhere. Why, when everyone else except a judicial officer could have been nominated as a member of the Rajya Sabha, why not a Chief Justice of India? That is my personal view, my personal conviction, and I feel that there is no difficulty in that. It should happen. But as you have rightly said, that what should be the issues that should be taken up? In the instant case, given the controversies with which he has gone to the Rajya Sabha, and given the controversies that had been shrouded while being the Chief Justice, I don't know how far he has been. He may be able to take up the issues before the court. But the most important issue, sorry, that need to be taken before the Parliament today, as regards the judicial refinement or reforms is concerned, is the pace, the appointment of judicial officers, right from Supreme Court down to the district level, Tehsil level, Taluka level. There is a large gap between the requirement and the placement. Another thing, to my mind, and I may sound to be very, very orthodox in my view, the mode, method and tenor of appointment of lower judiciary must be reverted back to the original system of persons in fact having 3 to 5 years of practice only to be appointed as judges. You see, to my point of view as a lawyer, what has been happening is that the change of the legal educational system, where in the earlier 3-year law course, a person used to be first exposed after his schooling to the university level. He was being exposed to the nuances of life by going from his village to the college or the university, from his house to the university, fighting through hoodlums and going through the buses and various other modes of transport, walking miles altogether, being exposed to a different freedom that a person gets in university or college than in the constricted, restrained environment of a school coming out from there. All those were exposing the person concerned to the nuances of life. And then he would be graduating. After 3 years of graduation, he'll be going on for 3 years of law. And then after those 3 years of law, he would be going to practice for 2-3 years, which would have exposed him to the real facet of life, the conflicts of life, the requirements of life. And that would have given him a very fair view of the life in its real perspective, the nuances of the life, the difficulties in life, the difficulties of reaching to a destination. Unfortunately, with our process of 5 years of law and direct placement as a judicial officer, some may be very good one. But yes, I honestly feel that system has failed. The mere training in a restrained environment is again like a school training, a school brought up. In judicial academy, howsoever a good judicial officer may be giving that training, to me, perhaps the exposure which a person would have got in 3 years or 5 years of legal practice, sweating it out on our district courts and realizing the difficulty of a lawyer or a party to contest his case is perhaps missing. That reform is required to be brought. I strongly would advocate, if given an opportunity, that somewhere down the line, some sort of experience must be made as the benchmark for appointment of all judicial officers, just as we have those benchmarks in higher judicial. That to me would be the paramount concern for any judicial reform in the country. So also a proper judicial reform in terms of statutory mandates, overhauling of our Code of Civil Procedure, Code of Criminal Procedure, IPC, and Indian Evidence Act. to my mind, these four major statutory mandates require massive change in outlook. And that would definitely reduce the burden on courts, and that would also reduce the burden and pendency of the courts. Because an expeditious process of trial, again, what is important is that any amendment in the system or a statutory mandate need to be based on trust that judiciary, that legislator, that police have to have in the people of India. Unless we are able to develop that trust, that bond of trust, perhaps any amendment is not going to help much. I hope I am able to answer your query. Any other question, Amanji? If you can take a few fast questions, if there are any.
Well, but given the time we've already exceeded.
Sure.
So I would like to stop it here for today.
And thank you.
Rajiv ji, before I close, as the technical people told me, I need to announce what we are having for tomorrow and day after. We have 2 sessions tomorrow, one at 12 o'clock on the essence of life and growth, which is going to be there. And that is going to be by Mr. Ashok Laha, who is the CEO for a company and an entrepreneur based out of the US, California, again. And the other one would be in the afternoon by Professor Deepak Gora, which will be on the same issue of India's confidence, but on is the viral war of India's secret weapon. What is that viral war he's going to talk about? But on the same issue of India's confidence to tackle this problem. That is going to be tomorrow. And then day after, we have Dr. Sadr from UAE, from Dubai, who's going to speak at 12 on the essence of life. And then in the afternoon, we are having Professor Dr. Yamini Agarwal, who's going to speak on the how to do research. So I thought I'll just, just brief this and then I'll close the session for today. Rajiv ji for taking time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to all the participants who have very patiently heard me. And thank you very much.
Law is an inevitable part of life and growth. We cannot take it out. It is what makes us disciplined and structured, and that's why it's important. And I'm happy that you took the time out. Instead of that 1 hour, it's in 2 hours now.
Oh,
and you
my pleasure. Thank you very much. It's been a
still
experience. Thank you.
There is a lot of interest, and maybe we'll hold some session specifically on
most welcome anytime.
One of the afternoons.
Thank
you.
you.